in this debate, we believe that at least from a certain stage, a fetus is a living thing that has right that the government should protect. Okay, we think that abortion is the extreme cases when sometimes the right of a woman for her own life or her own body is so strong that we allow to abort fetuses on some stage of the pregnancy. But once a woman takes responsibility on the child, on the fetus, decide to grow it and let it live, it has also the responsibility to make sure that it is healthy, that it is alive, that it's not actively hurting him. So what are we talking about? We're talking about that if women drink during pregnancy, or smokes too much, or takes drugs that hurts the fetus, okay, we think that they will get, she and her husband or partner will get a fine, a financial fine, and the store or bartender or whatever that allowed her to get those kind of substance is going to get fined too, and we think that is going to actually stop a lot of the harm that happens today. Clarification?
Yeah, clarification.
Yeah.
What happens to repeat offenders?
What happened to what?
To repeat offenders.
Repeat offenders? They get another fine. Okay? Yes, second.
So you say you have fine stores as well, but often a store cannot tell if a woman is pregnant, and if they ask her, she'll say no. How do you determine, the liability
First
of
of
the
all,
shop
we think
owner?
that things like how do you do it? First of all, how do you think? I will go into it in a second. Yes. Okay. Let's. How do you know that it happens? If a cop or some law enforcement see a woman that looks pregnant, he will ask her, and if it does, we'll give her a fine. A doctor, once he does periodic checks, will actually and see those substances in her blood, will give those fines. And we think that stores will have to make every check that they can in order to make sure they're not selling to a woman who is pregnant in any other way. Okay, so I have 2 points. Why is it legitimate to have those punishments? And secondly, why is it effective to actually help children? Okay, why is it legitimate? First of all, we think that the country has an obligation to protect the child. We think that a lot of the time taking those substances will actually make a lot of those children handicapped for their whole life, have health problems that will cause them a shorter life and miserable life. And specifically in those stages, there is no other way, there is no other actor that actually save them or protect them. It means that if their own mother is actually hurting them, nobody else can actually see it. Usually don't look for it unless we are, the government will actively look for those harms and save the child. Secondly, we think that specifically the women who takes the child take active responsibility on the child, because it has the choice whether to abort and whether to get into pregnancy, and it decided to keep the child. By that, even if for a regular person there was some kind of question whether he's reliable or not, specifically the mother and the family has an extra responsibility for the child. So even a mildly harm or even a statistical harm is even harder and has more responsibility to go for it. And thirdly, we think that since he's going to grow up and become a person and become a member of our society, and first of all, we'll have to pay for all of his medical problems and all of his handicap, and all of our social networks will actually going to pay for it. It means that every one of us as a country is going to take responsibility for him. It means that we need to make sure that he will not become one of those people who need it. It means because we are going to pay for the problems, we have the legitimacy to make sure that his health state is not to get that bad. Second, your extension, please. Okay.
Okay, so if you're in the terminal stages of pregnancy and you have to abort if you want to save the mother's life, should you be able to do that?
Yes, if a mother would die, we think that she can save herself. We think that there's extreme cases when there's a legitimate reason to do it, but the reason that I want to have a little wine with my friends is not good enough, and we think that that is the one that you should get harmed with. Okay, why is that going to be so effective? It's going to be effective both on the women's side and both of societies and places who allow her to do it. What do you mean? Why do we give fines to people who drives too fast? Okay, we all know that you can die and you can severely harm yourself if you drive too fast. The problem is that all of the time, small temptations with very low probability of actually catching is something that a lot of people just can't actually, it's very hard for people to resist. It means that when I'm tired and I want to go home fast, I might push on the gas even though I know it's so bad. We think that a lot of the time that's the exact same thing that happened with women in pregnancy. Yes, she knows it might hurt her child in a statistical matter. She knows that if she drink too much or smoke too much will be a problem. But right now she really wants a cigarette because her day was so bad. Right now she really wants to drink because she's with her friends and they're outside and it's only one drink and what will happen? And we think that by making that something that, putting people that actually look for it and by showing you what is going to happen if you do it, by hearing stories of other women who just took a smoke and then got those fine, it's a lot harder for them to actually, it will be a lot easier for them to resist the temptation. Extension?
Yeah. So we have many mechanisms in place to inform women of the harms of these drugs, and indeed we could up those using the same money.
Exactly. We'll up those to the extreme. We think that in the best case, nobody will ever get those fines if it works. If whatever you say that we can just alert them, we'll alert them, and then the motion, then it doesn't matter if we give the fines. But we do think that a lot of time it's not enough to know. You need someone that will look for you. We need the cops in bars looking for women, and we need people that every time that you see a smoking woman, you can call a cop, or every time that a doctor sees that a woman got smoked, he will tell a cop. It means that every time that you take a smoke, you know that the doctor will see it. You know that you will 100% will get a fine. This is what will give you the power to resist. This is what will give you the push not to do it even though you know it's harm. Secondly, we think that the sanction on society will reduce a lot of that. We think that once a bar owner, he have to sign every woman who, that looks pregnant, that she's not really pregnant, that he has to ask those women whether he can actually sell to them. Just like we can't sell smokes to really little children, they will not be able to sell smoke to pregnant women. We think that it just be a lot harder for them to actually get those substances, to actually do it publicly, it will be a lot harder to actually get those. So again, the resistance will be slow. We think there's a lot less children that we will be born with the handicap, with the health problem. We think that will make our world a lot better place. We will hope that the education will be enough, but we think that everyone that education is not good enough for them. Those mechanisms will actually help us make the world a better place. Because of those reasons, please propose. Thank you very much.
Thank the Prime Minister and invite the Leader Opposition to the floor to speak.
Ready? Can I just speak? I don't know who would like. Okay, I'll just.
I think the camera.
Contrary to what we hear from the Prime Minister, we don't think the vast majority of women in the absence of legal punishments would do things like drink or smoke regularly during pregnancy. We think that the context of this debate are the marginal cases in which criminal punishment is actually likely to either change the decision calculus of women or have a significant impact on their lives regardless of the decision that we make. We think that the difficult decision that often comes with having to make choices between yourself as a woman and the child or fetus you're carrying within you is not something that should be sanctioned by the state. So, two things in this speech. Firstly, weighing on female autonomy and fetal health and the specific context in which this is likely to be needed to be used on our side. Secondly, why they get worse reproductive policy on their side. First, just saying, we can counterprop things like health campaigns, subsidies for doctors, and health checks to ensure that women are regularly kept informed. Gov can do this too. I'm just pointing out this mitigates a decent amount of their accidental smoking impact. 2 points of extraneous rebuttal though. First, on the analogy to speeding that we get, and the general logic we get behind this is, if you put something put a person at a risk of harm, you should be punished and fined by the state. The reason why we find speeders is because people don't suffer a harm for not speeding. That is to say that the benefit you get for speeding is not commensurate to the risk you put on other people. Note this is exceptionally different in cases in which people are having to give up entire aspects of their bodily autonomy in order to protect someone else. But secondly, the argument is, society becomes more cautious, so bartenders will start asking people, we think it's generally problematic that you create norms in society that anyone can ask women before they do something, are you pregnant? Do you have a fetus in you? Before they have to ask essentially permission to do things in the case that they get attention. Note the extraordinarily weighing I'll do later is that this creates a massive burden on women, both who are pregnant, but if opening government's argument is to be believed, all women in general. That is to say, that the fact that it's not visible means that there's an incentive for all restaurants and bars to ask any woman who wants alcohol, are you pregnant, are you not? And like the problematic nature of that is probably something that's opening government or closing government should address. So let's talk about women's autonomy versus fetal health. Because let's note that the context in which this is likely to be used is one in which it's not haphazard in the way that opening government is. It's likely to be rather significant instances. And there are two more reasons for this. The first is that a lot of social pressure exists. That is to say that independent of laws for culture and tradition and social norms that we have, there's a significant strong emphasis on children's health and the responsibility that mothers and parents in general have towards it. It means that women aren't just likely to be like 5 months pregnant and say, I'm kind of tired, or I'll have a couple of glasses of wine today. It means that the people around them and themselves, because of the guilt they may face, are unlikely to do so. But secondly, recognize that it's significant on medical awareness issues. That is to say that every restaurant has that sign that says no drinking if you're pregnant, and it's even about things like health classes in high school, regardless of what country you're in or what state, means that there's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of knowledge out there about fetal health. It means that the instances in which women would likely do things that would harm their fetus are things that are extraordinarily important to them and things that they otherwise would have no other alternatives in doing. Like, the more trivial example of this would be women who have to do like hard labor during pregnancy or work longer hours despite that being against labor regulations. But more importantly and more substantially, it's the examples opening government talked about. It's women who have to do things like take medication that may impact the density of their blood, which would obviously have an impact on the fetus that depends on their placenta or something, but have to do so in order to make sure that the health exists. Also women who have things like drug addiction problems, who simply can't do things like just cut themselves off, and opening government does something particularly harmful, which is you take people who are often stigmatized by society and stigmatize them even further, in addition to finding them especially more likely to happen on repeat offenders. So, this is the extraordinarily simple weighing that you have to do. The choices that are likely to occur to women are extremely deep, extremely personal, and extremely substantive in their lives. Compare this with the health effects on the fetus, which are A, not guaranteed. That is to say, I'm not denying the harms of fetal drinking, but there's like a % chance of harms happening versus a guaranteed loss of autonomy, meaning that even if you view both as life, both as living people, the odds of something bad happening are guaranteed to the women, whereas the odds of you drinking and harming the fetus is, 50, 60, 70%. There's some margin of error there. But secondly, recognize that the weighing is double jeopardy. That is to say, it's likely that women who face such significant circumstances are likely going to do this anyways. You're going to take the blood thinning medication. If you're a drug addict, you're not just going to cut yourself off cold turkey. The problematic aspect of government's policy is you place these women in a double jeopardy. Not only do they have to do things that our society looked down upon for their own survival or their own well-being, but now they have the onus of a criminal prosecution against them. Long drawn-out legal battles in which they're prosecuted, they're asked how good of a mother they are, in addition to paying things like fines on their side. I'll take one from closing first.
Notably, the existence of these laws means also the existence of other laws which regulate surrounding problems. So if it's women working hard labor, probably it's easier to get paid maternity leave. On our side, government fiat. That just makes no sense.
First of all, government fiat extends to the motion, not to whatever other policy you'd like to implement. Why don't you just fiat in like world peace while you're at it? Okay? But I'm going to address the reproductive policies later on. Why do they get worse reproductive policies on our side? There are 3 reasons for this. First note is that on their side, you cement the norm that whatever happens to the fetus is entirely the woman's fault. That is to say that it's not a result of biology forcing women to be in this scenario, but you're saying that you have made a decision to do this to your fetus. It means that the onus of agency is entirely on them instead of society. Secondly, recognize you solidify and strengthen the norm of fetal personhood. Note that every single one of opening government's arguments are applicable to doing things like banning abortion at any term of the pregnancy. I'm not saying that opening government supports this. I'm saying that movements that advocate for things like reproductive rights can't do things like split the difference on these. Either they have to advocate for repealing this law and abortion restrictions, but they can't do both because they look significantly more hypocritical doing both. Opening, because I have to take it.
Can you weigh some discomfort you get from being asked whether you're pregnant to a lifetime of handicap or health problem that the fetus might have while you grow up?
Note that that wasn't the primary harm I emphasized. I just said there's a problematic element of the opening government's argument. The real harm is women who can't take blood thinners or who are significantly less likely to do so, or if they do so, are going to get prosecuted. Or thirdly, note that you said perniciously bad legal precedent. Because note that when courts adjudicate issues of law that they often don't have prior experience in, it means that they often defer to previous precedent and existing law as to what they should believe. Note that at the point at which you create this norm in society, the precedent that courts look down on to make judgments about future laws in areas that they don't have expertise tend to defer to the side of fetal personhood, because they say, society accepts this is the norm in society, this is what the law says. The impacts of this are pernicious. It's restriction on abortions, things like shorter time frames to decide, because you restrict the ability of women to get restrictions from the first 3 months of pregnancy to the first month of pregnancy. It's things like less abortion doctors available and less state support for that. These long-drawn legal battles for women. But note, in countries where legal protections aren't strong for reproductive freedoms, they get perniciously worse. It means that laws you need on the books initially to establish the beachhead of rights, if you will, doesn't exist. This is the extraordinarily simple weighing that has to be addressed by the government. It is unclear, substantively, medically, physically, philosophically, whether or not the fetus is alive. This is a philosophical question that's existed for thousands of years. We're not going to solve it. What we can guaranteedly know is that women are people, meaning that you guarantee harms on women as opposed to guaranteeing harms on people who we may not know are fully human biologically or physically. We're incredibly proud to oppose this solution.
Opposition for their remarks by the Deputy Prime Minister because of the opening government.
So a lot of what we've heard from the opening opposition is just saying that it is just a few cases, and therefore some aspects that happens to the women in those cases are really important. This is not an actual analysis. What we've showed you is that although we accept that the amount of cases is small, the amount of harm that happens in those cases is huge. We say that although there is just a small number of, let's say, women who choose to kill their own children when they are 5, we still think that it should be illegal because it harms their children a lot, although they must be really annoying if they kill their children when they are 5. We think that although it harms the women that their child is screaming in the house, they should not be allowed to kill them. And we think that the harms that happens to the child are analogous in many aspects in this case too. I'll talk about one major point after a long rebuttal, which will be a criteria to when it is legitimate to ban stuff, when it is legitimate from the government to actually give punishments when people do stuff. Before that, a lot of rebuttal. Because let's start by rebutting their rebuttal to what we've said. Firstly, they said that it is very different from speeding or drunk driving because you don't gain anything by those stuff. This is obviously stupid. You might be late to a meeting if you don't drive very fast, and it might even get you fired. You might be able to, you might have to take a taxi and pay money if you can't drive drunk, which also affects you financially in some aspects. We say it doesn't matter. Although it harms you, the harm to the society, even if it's not a certain harm, just the potential harm to the society is much bigger, and therefore we are still legitimate to give you financial enforcements not to do those stuff, such as fine, or in extreme cases, even get you to jail if you're drunk driving. So we don't think those things are analogous. Then they talk about the bartenders, which they try to make like the worst thing ever, but actually even today, when you try to fly abroad, they ask you if you are pregnant. If you go to a theme park, they ask you if you are pregnant. We don't think there's such an enormous difference if also the bartender asks you that, but we think that obviously the bartender wouldn't ask any women, because it won't be eligible to getting a fine if a woman that he couldn't see or lie to him would do those stuff. So we probably ask only women who seem pregnant, which on late pregnancy is very similar to most women. So we think it's probably easy to, at least in some cases, get very effective on those stuff too, and not have a very harm to the the vast majority of the other people in the society. Then they try to talk to us about the fact that it's not really effective because all of the special cases that they've talked, which must be the only cases where it is done. We think that most of what they've talked about is not really in this debate. Let's go on it one by one. Firstly, they say whether you have to take special medications or stuff. We are completely fine with the doctor telling you when it is legal to take this medication and when it's not, and therefore you won't do anything illegal. In some cases where the harm to you could be bigger than the potential risk to the fetus, it won't be illegal. Obviously, the doctor is the one to decide it. Then they talk about certain jobs that put you in risk. We think that those jobs should obviously be illegal, and it is within the wording of the motion of like laws that protect the health of the fetus. Obviously, you should give them maternal leave, you should give them pay for not working this job, give them option to work in other jobs, just pass like government regulation to prevent those stuff. Those are like nitpicking and not talking about the real issues in this debate. Then they're getting closer when they talk about the drug addicts. But we think that also the arguments they make there are really weird to me. Because what is the main thing that they've told us? But now you are putting them of doing something illegal if they're a drug addict. We think this is mostly the status quo when they're already doing something illegal if they're a drug addict. But also, we say that even in this scenario, they can go to a clinic and try to get rehab. We think this is what a woman should do if she's having a baby and want to keep it while she is a drug addict. And yes, we won't punish her for the first month when she's going through rehab if she's trying to do the best she can, like all legal procedures. So we don't think it affects most of those women that much. But what have we told you? That there are many cases where it is effective. Because it's really easy not to think about those things or say there is just a slim chance that something will happen when you just go out with your friends and having a drink or go out with your friend and having a cigarette. We think that those are the stuff that women tend not to think about because it seems so far ahead in the future. But when you get there to a close things that's going to get to you, like a fine or like people telling you you can't do those things, then those women will stop doing that. And that means millions of people around the world not being born with severe diseases, severe handicaps, which destroys their life. This is the thing that opposition need to weigh on their side of the house, and we didn't really get those things from them by now. Before I move on, I will take a second.
Yeah, if you are someone who is doing these kind of things, you're either doing them by yourself or surrounded by a group of people who doesn't care because otherwise the social pressure would have enacted and probably would have prevented you from doing it anyway. How likely are you to change the majority of individuals'
So we think
conduct?
that most of those stuff, like drinking or smoking a cigarette, happens in public places. We're mostly doing them with the public, and we think that also if the people around you will know more that it is actually illegal, not just slightly not acceptable, then they would be more harsh on that too. This is what happens with like smoking weed. Although it is really acceptable, people are less comfortable of doing it when they know that it is illegal in some states. It might not be 100% attractive, it might be 50%, but it is still saving 50% of those babies. So let's talk about like when it is legitimate for the government to do those things. Because what if, like, three stuff that happens on our side of the house. Firstly, a harm to a third party. Secondly, you could have like foreseen this thing coming to you and like could have prevented it yourself. And thirdly, the trade-off is not too bad on your side. Why is that happens? Like, this is how we make things illegal. When you hurt someone else, and this is your decision, and like we think that like when like it's not like a self-defense that you would have been harmed more, just like you decided that you will harm this other somebody. What happens here? So you do harm a third party, because first we think that definitely on a 7th or 8th month months, like the baby is alive. Opposition need to define why the line is when he is actually born. We don't think it is like a premise that everyone should just accept in this debate. When he actually has a mind and can think and can feel things, it is not as the first 3 months. It also, yeah, just like triggering the chain of consequences is enough. So let's say I left my gas open in the house. I didn't intend to harm anyone, but then someone came here and the gas exploded. It is my fault that I left the gas open knowing that something like that could happen, although I didn't mean to hurt anybody, although he wasn't there at the moment I did it. But also, I could have foreseen those stuff. And also we say that in this specific case, the trade-off is on our side of the house. Although on pregnancy and abortions, the women tends to lose a lot. It tends to lose the ability to control her own body, the physical changes, the psychological changes, the effect on the rest of her life. But in this case, it's only stopping to smoke for a few months. It is not such a big trade-off on their side of the house. So we think, as we can make those differences, obviously, the policy guys on our side of the house will also make those differences, which make it very different than abortion laws that just throw up to the air. If we are supporting specifically the wording of this with those arguments, then we don't think it premises other things that we haven't analyzed. Please support the motion. Thank you.
I think the deputy prime minister, but the deputy leader
In 2013, I believe, Ireland legalized abortion because of a very prolific case where a woman who was pregnant wanted to carry the child, but towards the terminal stages of her pregnancy, could not abort that child despite health complications and died as a result of that. On their world, this woman is going to get sued at any point where she questions whether or not she wanted to abort that child in the first place, because you already made that decision. You already decided that you're going to term. No, the fetus has legal personhood. The fetus has rights that you cannot take away. The argument that they make means that in countries that don't have access to abortion, you make it significantly harder to get any sort of push for these things. But in countries that do, you make it harder to maintain these laws. Two things in this speech. Firstly, on reproductive rights and why we think they harm them significantly. Secondly, on like the principal argument on this, responding largely to the OG's principal case. And lastly, on Way. But the first thing to point out in terms of principle is that their principal analogy is flawed, right? Because their analogy is things like speeding, for example. Except even in that particular analogy, we still compare the benefits versus harm. What am I talking about? That is to say, if there's a person in your car that's about to die and you need to go to the hospital, you're not going to be fined for speeding in that particular case, right? So insofar as that's true, the question in this debate is still a comparison of benefits versus harm. There's no absolute right that exists. So the question in this debate is just, are there more harms to this policy? Let's talk about that. Firstly, on reproductive rights. Jinmo says a couple of things that go significantly under-responded to. The first thing he talks about is about social movements and the way in which they talk about abortion. It just does not get responded to. What does Jinmo tell you here? The first thing it tells you is that it's significantly hard to simultaneously argue that in certain cases fetuses have legal personhood and in other cases that they don't. The specific distinction that they draw on their side is it depends on whether or not you decide whether or not to have the child in the first place. But that's a terrible line, for example, in terms of the rhetoric that political movements are able to use, right? It's hard for me to convince the average person that the personhood of a child should be decided on whether or not the mother decides, right? Because presumably it's either they have rights or they don't. It's unclear whether the mother gets to decide this in the first place. So it's a terrible argument that makes it significantly harder for political movements to justify the kinds of policies they want to do to increase abortion laws without violating the law in the first place. But the second, we'll also compare this, for example, to the right that exists in most countries that's staunchly anti-abortion and takes a very confirmed stance that abortion should be illegal regardless. On the comparison between these two political things, we'd argue people are more likely to be swayed towards an argument that abortion should be illegal if the left is sort of wishy-washy on which specific cases it should be legal and which it shouldn't. They lose these cases, which means political movement is significantly less effective at being able to guarantee these rights for women in the first place. But the second thing I want to talk about is the legal definition here, because again, right, it's unclear why legal definitions of personhood should be based on whether or not the mother decides. Well, it's either the law defines them as people or the law doesn't, right? But even if for somehow in their case the legal precedent is something like that, right? Let's say the law is one that says the mother is able to decide this question. The problem, however, is you're still going to have significant amount of women, for example, who are sued for having abortions, particularly, for example, if they made that decision after they decided to carry the baby to term and later found out that there were significant health complications to their life or significant harms. The response that we get from OG is, but if there are serious harms to your life, then we should be able to do it. The problem here is what they're forcing women to do is women who have made a significantly hard and incredibly traumatic choice in their life are now forced to go in front of a court and demonstrate the level of harm that was happened on them in order to justify this action. We think that's unconscionable to force women to be put in that position where they have to justify the level of harm that happened to them in order to kill a child, a fetus that they very likely thought was their child and loved dearly. Right? I think it's an incredibly problematic harm. Lastly, I want to respond to this POI that we get from CG, in which they say, now we get more political movements for things like maternity rights. A couple of responses. The first thing is that the thing that Jinmo says the response is preemptively is that what you do is set a standard of placing the blame on these pregnant women. That is, say the fault is of these women that they did these particular things. The fault is of the women that they did things, for example, like go to work or do hard labor because they had to put food on the plate, but the harm was on them because they were responsible for that child once they decided to have it. But also secondly, the rhetoric then becomes things like, why don't you just stay at home and be a stay-at-home mother instead of going to work, because you should just take care of the child, right? Because it's your responsibility. Now that you've decided to have the child, you make it significantly harder for women, for example, to access jobs and levers of power post this. I'll take closer.
So Roe versus Wade established this arbitrary criteria that we talk about. Without the legal nuance, how do you imagine that abortion laws work? You just allow people to abort whenever they want? Is that going to appease to the conservatives?
Yes, Roe v. Wade is an incredibly complicated loop-de-loop of specific laws that allow for abortion. What that means is governors in Texas, for example, are able to significantly restrict your access to abortion, which means that, for example, women in most southern states have to wait for weeks and weeks in order to get abortion, and means that they're significantly unable to get these things. On your side, even if abortion is legal, it becomes significantly harder to enable access to abortion, which is the most vulnerable women get worse off on your side. On the principle that we get from OG. The first thing, the response that we get from OG is it's legitimate to find these women because they have a responsibility on their side. A couple of things. The first thing is Jinmo's beginning of his speech establishes specific cases in which women are likely to do this and why there isn't a responsibility. What does Jinmo tell you? Jinmo tells you that it's incredibly unlikely and almost impossible that women are doing this out of malicious intent. That a lot of them are probably caring mothers who probably care about their child and do this because of a couple of things. The first thing they claim is, it's going to be ignorance. Yes, we can still have doctors give you this information. Insofar as most women probably go for multiple checkups to doctors, we can probably provide this information at any point. Even if they start doing it at some point, we can stop them before it's too late, right? Then the question becomes, what are the specific cases that matter? It's the cases that Jinmo tells you, which is specific cases of coercion that happen on these women. What are these cases? First, economic coercion. The fact that you have to go to a job to support your family, but now you're forced to do things, for example, like not be able to go to that job, which means, opening before that.
Yeah, in the US and Israel, fetuses were considered to have some rights, but the rights of the women over their body has more power. There is no contradiction there, but you are never actually comparing to the rights of the people who were born and suffering all through their life in our side of the house.
Yes, but the point that I was making is that now every single woman has to defend the amount of harm that happened to them in order for them to justify having an abortion. That's the worst world to live in. The second thing they talk about is a speeding example that I've already talked about, which is in, for example, significant harm, we still have like the right to advocate this, right? The specific case that Jinmo tells you, for example, is the people like drug addicts who, the response that we get from their side is, they can just go to rehab. You make it significantly harder for them to approach rehab, right? Because on top of the level of stigma that they get on your side, you're also telling them, by the way, you're going to be fined, you're going to have significant economic distress as a result of this policy. Maybe if you just go cold turkey over the next 5 months, we'll forgive you, but it means that the people who are incredibly unlikely already to approach rehab centers are even less likely to. The weighing that you get at the end of Jinmo's speech is how you should decide this round. It's unclear whether or not these fetuses have rights, right? We're not saying they don't, we're just saying it's unclear. What we do know for a fact is that these women do have a right to have abortion, do have a right to have a life that isn't encumbered by the kinds of harms they create on these women. But also the case is that even if they're correct that in some cases fetuses are hurt, those specific people are harmed. On their side, all women are harmed. That's what matters in this debate.
The deputy leader opposition, I remember government, you have nothing to go
Honorable panel, even though we're an ESL team in the middle of America on a purportedly anti-feminist side, we're still going to win this round because that's the extent to which OO is wrong. We're going to establish two things. First of all, the principal responsibility to protect, and we're going to actually give you a metric which OG lacks, and that is between two equal lives, we decide which life to protect on the basis of the agency it had to choose its circumstances. Secondly, we're going to actually take off at their best, which OG tries to outframe. We're going to engage on the mother versus baby comparative and show why we win on that as well. All of rebuttal will be integrated. Let's talk about the responsibility to protect. There are numerous levels I want to talk about here. Note that even when deciding between two fully rational adults, we still decide to protect the life of a person when they have no consent to their life being endangered. I.e., if I'm waiting for an organ transplant and I'm not going to get it before I die, I am not legally entitled to kill a member of the panel and take their organs, even though it would save my life. Note OO's metric. Why? Because given that the fundamental premise of having equal human rights, which is something the OO wants to stand for, is every person being a unique moral actor whose rights are equally valuable, this means we cannot make a utilitarian calculus between lives. What is then true is we need to find another criterion. The criterion is how much agency you have to choose the circumstances which happen to you, because if you do not have that agency, you are unable to shape your life in the way which you desire, therefore it's necessarily not your definition of happiness. This therefore means that because I did not have the agency to choose that somebody kills me to take my organs, it is illegal to kill me to take my organs. But that even increases when we talk about other cases. For example, we protect children because we believe that given they do not have economic endowment or political power, they're even less capable to protect themselves. So we enforce principles that are even more stringent, not like the good practice principles in universities and schools. You're not even allowed to have kids who are coaching for debate as friends on Facebook. Why? Because we believe that you took over responsibility to protect them at the point where you as a person endowed with more power have taken the position to be responsible for them. Why does especially especially specific in the case of a fetus, because it's absolutely no agency whatsoever. If I decide to attack a child on the street, it at least gets to kick its feet and maybe kick me in the balls. The fetus is not even able to do that. Absolutely no decision-making power. Why is that important? Because the motion in and of itself states that the life is certain, meaning we are talking about consequences which are certainly going to happen at the end of the debate. This also answers Trenton's POI. We can see that the metric in this debate does not have to be quantitative. The metric of this debate is who provides the best definition of how to weigh between two equal lives. We say that given the weighing has to happen because the motion posits the certainty of life, we say the life that had less potential to consent to things happening to it is probably the one we should prioritize. And this leads me to going into the mother versus baby comparative. Not really the only thing to engage with this or necessarily remove or open in government because they're essentially outframed by this. So even in cases where mothers have to choose over the lives of their babies, we say this is legitimate for two reasons. A, if you want to take a utilitarian metric, we say the potentiality of life is simply on our side, as in the amount of years that you're able to live through and the net amount of happiness. But even we do not believe in utilitarianism all that much on CG, we say there's another principle, and that's the principle of consent, right? When you decided to become a mother, you consented to the fact that it would potentially be risky. You are fully informed of the fact that it might even lead to your death. But by deciding to become a mother, you have taken up responsibility for the life of that child, and you have done it in a fully informed way. Now this is analogous to policemen and firemen being the last to leave a building if a fire or terrorist attack happens. They are risking their own lives, but by entering that service, they have consented to the fact it might happen, and were informed about the fact that it might happen, in comparison to the civilians caught in a fire who had absolutely no agency to choose being caught in that fire. Not to extend this responsibility to when children are actually born, i.e. we take away your custody if you are an avid drinker or similar things. Why do we do this? Because you took that responsibility upon yourself. Why is this important at the end of the day? Because the metric of informed consent is what we bring you on Closing Government necessarily. To the extent to which the motion posits the certainty of life, at the end, this means that if you have taken consent and also consented to bringing the life to its term, you also need to take into account the consequences of your decisions, i.e. if you do not send your child to school, we hold you legally responsible for the consequence of not doing that in the long term because it's going to harm the child's prospects and it never had a choice. I'll be very happy to take Trenton, yeah.
Yeah, if the most extreme cases that Gov wants to occur, that often means that the fetus is never born. The woman can also withdraw her consent to bring the child into the world at any point and then abort the fetus. Miscarriages often happen. There is not a certainty of life. You're often punishing a woman for a harm that will never actually
Trenton,
prove
that
the
is
person.
true in the real world. It is not true according to what the motion says. In order for this motion to be debated, we need to have the intention of the woman carrying the child to term. That's literally what is stated within the wording. But let's move on to a lot of rebuttals. So there are numerous things that open opposition wants to say to us. First of all is the idea of women not being able to do their work. Okay, several responses to this. One of all, it's severely unlikely that it's going to be illegal to go to your job if you are pregnant. What is more likely is there are also going to be follow-up laws making it illegal for you to be forced to work hard labor while you are pregnant, and it's more likely you're going to have maternity leave. Their logic is analogous to them saying we should not outlaw murder because that then makes people unable to act in self-defense. Of course it's illegal to kill, but of course it's illegal to kill someone if they're attacking you. Those two things can coexist. Note also, to the extent to which they can fiat their own counterprop, we can also fiat in other laws. That also happens. But note, thirdly, we have more political capital to argue for maternity leave and similar things. Because one of the main arguments against it is women have a choice. To the moment when they actually do not have a choice and are legally forced to do something, it's easier to argue for giving them more leeway in terms of laws. I'll take opening if they have anything.
Women who are drug addicts or need life-saving medications only have a nominal right of choice instead of substantive consent.
I literally just answered that POI. Okay, moving onwards. The idea of having campaigns which inform women, this increases the legitimacy of our policy. Because the more your consent is informed, the more responsibility we expect you to take. I.e., we're very happy to take OO's counterprop, and we say this makes the policy even more legitimate, because if you have more information and then you still engage in risky behavior, it's probably more of a reason to fine you. But let's respond to the argument about fetal personhood and how we encourage anti-abortion movements. Numerous responses. One, people who are anti-abortion generally believe against abortion for reasons that are unrelated to government laws, i.e. religion, i.e. morality. I do not see why a person who believes abortion is moral is now going to say, oh, the government imposed a new law, I suddenly changed my whole moral compass. That's very unlikely. But secondly, we're more able to argue for abortion on our side, because now as the government we can say, look, you, as the Christians or whoever, are concerned about the lives that are certain. Those lives we protected. For the lives in which cases abortion is inevitably going to happen, we're going to legalize abortion because the comparative is it happening illegally. But thirdly, note what Lover tells you in his POI. We already draw the arbitrary line. We draw it at 3 months. Why? Because otherwise we'd have to allow abortion at all stages of pregnancy. Given we're certain the fetus is sentient at some point, we need to draw an arbitrary line, because otherwise opposition's line becomes untenable. I see no way in which opposition can win this debate.
I think we're going to have to fight from that practice.
Are you ready?
Panel, government in this debate substantially cares most importantly, apparently, about the quality of the life of these children. If we manage to prove on closing opposition that the quality of life of these children is substantially detrimented by a chilling effect that is created on mothers which no longer now seek help in instances in which medical help will help them mitigate the effects of such crises, if it leads to mothers being entrenched into a further spiral of poverty, if it indeed leads to women being having to harm their own baby because they are deprived from resources, we tell you they're not achieving their objectives, rather making the lives of these children even further. Those will be the main points of our extension, but we'll go even further and explain even better than opening opposition why you get a likelier probability of political palatability shifting in favor of banning abortion or restricting it. So, getting straight into those extensions. First of all, crucially, as I've said, the government objectives is protecting the quality of the life of children. But I'd like you to first recognize that a lot of times opening government says that many of the decisions to drink or smoke that mothers take are impulsive, right? They say a lot of times they're done in instances of recreational or indeed in social peer pressure instances, right? That means that a lot of times, often these will still happen, and indeed they cannot stop. No, they cannot enforce their rule as well as they would have wanted to in all instances because they're impulsive behavior. But crucially, also, a lot of times mothers realize often after they smoke or drunk, but more importantly, when they find out their child has a problem, they want to help their child. They want to treat their child. They want to support their child and take preemptive treatment so they ensure their condition doesn't worsen. What we tell you now is by criminalizing this particular type of activity, substantially now women know that if they go to the doctor or try to seek help or preemptive measure afterwards, they will be fined. They will be questioned. Their bodies will be policed, and they will be constantly in an instance in which they will be afraid of being dragged into court and fined for that continuously. That has three main effects. First of all, a lot of times mothers won't go to the hospital seeking medical advice after drinking or smoking, right? Or recognize we already have means if they would go to hospital to mitigate the effects of that. We have IV drips, for example, for intoxicated women, which mitigate the harmful effects that could have upon the child. If a mother realizes that she has drunk and that might affect the child, she can go to hospital and she will be given preemptive treatment. They won't do that anymore because the mother knows that if she does go to the hospital, she will be fined and prosecuted, right? Crucially, she's now willing to cop the risk of her child because she knows it's just a risk of her child developing a disease rather than face the certainty, the clear certainty of her being fined in hospital. Second of all, later on in the pregnancy, when she develops signs of being worried, right? If she has bleeding during the pregnancy or there is a sign of the harm to the child for an ecography, she will not go to ask for preemptive treatment to help mitigate the effects of drinking-related malformation, right? Because she knows, again, that she will be prosecuted for that and she will be harmed. The child's life
is detrimented because later on he does develop that conditions in its most extreme form. But furthermore, if the effects appear after birth or a while after birth, right, such as with autistic children because of smoking-related activities, right, crucially mothers after birth will delay as much as they can the moment at which they take their child to an autistic clinic, right, because, or even not go to get treatment at all, because they know that doctors have to police her, right, and crucially if they suspect that the source is drinking or smoking, have to find her and have to report it to the police. So ultimately you get a substantial delay. What does substantial delay means after the child is born? Crucially, the effects of autism become irreversible, and indeed you cannot mitigate them at any point or go with the child in preemptive therapy because the mother is afraid of this particular fine, right? Crucially, OO says, the mother won't go to rehab for her drug addiction, right? But far more chilling is the effect that she won't go for the child's problem and won't deal with the child's issues. I'd like to take a POI opening.
Yeah. In the vast majority of cases, we deter those actions. In most other actions, they will be inspected. But on your 10 cases that are left, we think that most mothers will care in that scenarios most about the children than about themselves.
I'll make that comparison at the end of this argument. That's a good comparison. So second of all, we tell you that any form of punishment will harm the child. A fine is a financial penalty which is imposed upon the mother while she's still pregnant, right? Or even if it's immediately after giving birth, it's still a financial penalty imposed in the early years of child development. That means the mother a lot of times has less resources for the child, for nutrition, for pampers, right? These are expensive things, especially in the early days when you are getting only 2 hours of sleep per night and are unemployed because you have to care for your child. There are substantial effects which detriment, the development of the child in his early years. But furthermore, we tell you that very few mothers would do this, like smoke, drink intentionally, right? Willingly, because they love their child and so on. But if they do so, they're very likely from vulnerable communities, right? Not only are they, drug users, as O says, but overwhelmingly they come from impoverished backgrounds, right? With mental states in which they're depressed or working the gig economy and are in poverty or sometimes are even unemployed, right? Crucially for these mothers specifically, right, you find them and deepen their poverty, get less resources for their child, and they also spiral out of state support services because the state has just punished them for it. And here's the way, the child is far worse off in these instances. Here's the weighing that I promised opening government. Very few children will actually end up with alcohol-related malformations, right? It's not a huge number, it's not millions as they say, but comparatively, far more mothers will become far poorer and deepen in a spiral of their own vulnerability because of these fines, and in the rare instances where the child develops these afflictions, he cannot be treated, preemptive norms cannot be imposed, and in no way can you mitigate the effects of that appeal. Yeah, but
this is only about a small amount of mothers who are extremely heavy drinkers. Is the logic of your argument we should not take away custody from heavy drinkers because the ability of losing custody makes you more likely to homeschool your child?
So by the way, taking custody away from heavy drinkers comes in the moment in which the child is already born, right? But crucially comes in the instance when the mother has. Look, you don't impose the same chilling effect when you do that, right? Because crucially, then you have the ability to take the child, right, in a particular environment in which he isn't harmed anymore. You don't have the ability when she's still pregnant, and you can take preemptory effects before that. But lastly, I want to tell you about how it's not only as OO say that you cannot theoretically split the distinction and thus will favor anti-abortion supporters. It's also that greater climate in which policemen, as OG says, policemen seeing women on the street should ask them if they're pregnant. Neighbors have a duty to report. This is a climate where society feels and is told that they should feel entitled to police women's bodies. Then laws that ban abortion or restrict it hugely become far more palatable. You've just shifted the Overton window of political palatability because suddenly you've told people in all society it's fine to police women's bodies as per opening government's point, right? But the argument that also convinces most conservatives to allow abortions, namely that the child is not alive, doesn't work anymore, and you reverse it specifically because now you're telling them the exact opposite. Because of all these reasons, the child is far worse off in their world. Thank you.
I think the member up there invite the government, but without the government.
Da, to sam ja pitao ponovno. Da se to ne retardira.